As I sat there and watched it, this thing stood up and walked right through the wall beside this patient's bed. I have no idea what it was. Was it hurting this patient? Did this patient see it and was terrified?
Why do hospitals become epicenters of ghostly activity? Is it all the pain and fear that passes through their doors over the years? Maybe it's the unfinished business of those who met tragic ends. Or perhaps some spirits never received their discharge papers, so they wait forever. Welcome to First in Fright, where we explore eerie legends, supernatural tales, and everything that goes bump in the North Carolina night. I'm your host, Cooper Thornton. This is Episode 5, Haunted Hospitals. Our local storyteller takes us back to the post-World War II era, when the world was hit by a feared and deadly disease. Its devastation can still be felt today in the form of ghosts.
Tucked away in Greensboro is an old, dilapidated building with a tragic past. It doesn't look like much, certainly not the sort of place that inspires nightmares. But looks, as the saying goes, can be deceiving. Just a few days after the end of World War II, the United States faced the worst epidemic in its history up to that point: polio. It killed thousands and incapacitated tens of thousands. For its victims, many of whom were infants and small children, severe muscle pain and disabling paralysis often hit within just a few days of a severe headache. To keep them alive, patients were quickly isolated, and the sickest were placed into massive iron lungs, machines that did their breathing for them. The onset of the outbreak was so fast and so brutal that hospitals across the country scrambled to deal with the surge of infection. Per capita, North Carolina's Guilford County was the hardest hit anywhere in the nation. They needed to do something, and they needed to do it fast. Just 95 days later, in October of 1948, they completed the Central Carolina Convalescent Hospital. Families brought their children from all over the state for treatment, and a great many survived because of heroic doctors who called the place home for the next decade. Dr. Jonas Salk developed a polio vaccine in the mid-1950s, and thankfully, the hospital was no longer needed. Today, only one of the wings remains. All the others have been torn down. The building looks abandoned. The paint is peeling, and many of the windows have been boarded up. The last group to occupy it, Guilford County Animal Services, stored supplies here. But that's not all that remains here, because while many patients entered, some never left. Animal Services employees have relayed hair-raising encounters. Doors slammed shut and locked all by themselves. Lights popped on and off, and haunting rapping sounds echoed down the hallways. And because it's an old building, you might easily dismiss the activity if it weren't for far more chilling experiences. Workers have seen ghostly faces staring at them through the interior windows of empty rooms. They've seen shapes pause in the hallways before moving through solid walls. They have recorded spectral voices talking in the middle of rooms filled only with dusty boxes. And, most frightening of all, several have been touched. Years ago, a volunteer was organizing supplies when she felt 3 taps on her shoulder. She turned, expecting to see one of her colleagues, but she was all alone in the room. She left and swore she would never return. Hearing the story, her supervisor returned to the facility to investigate. Alone in the building, he was sorting files when tap, tap, tap. He felt someone, or something, repeatedly rap the back of his neck. Knowing he was all alone, the terrified supervisor didn't even bother to turn around. Not surprisingly, the organization soon found a new location to store their supplies. And so the ghosts of the hospital wait for their next unsuspecting victims.
The encounters at the Central Carolina Convalescent Hospital are scary, but imagine if it were still operational. Well, that's the reality of our next hospital located in Morganton. A local storyteller tells us a first-hand account from someone who was on the inside.
My name is Margaret Langley. I was a nurse at Broughton Hospital for 17 years. I'm also the author of Haunted Broughton, Tales from the Graveyard Shift, which is an appropriate title, both because I most often worked the graveyard shift and because I regularly encountered entities that absolutely should have been in the grave. I graduated from nursing school in December of 1993, and my very first job was at Broughton Hospital in 94. The state of North Carolina badly needed nurses, so they offered all nursing students a grant if we'd work at a state hospital for a year. I accepted, and they assigned me to Broughton. The hospital started off in 1875 with just 100 patients that they brought in on a train. They built a special spur right off the main rail line. It ended at Broughton so they could deliver them straight to the front door. But when the patients got here, the buildings weren't yet completed, so they put the patients to work in helping finish the construction. And when they weren't working, they chained these poor patients to trees out in the front yard. You see, back then, doctors didn't have the same approach to mental illness and, treatment that we do now. They used to think that insanity was contagious and you could catch it like the common cold. They designed the main building with lots of windows so that the wind would literally blow the insanity out. That was the theory back then. There was a lot of mistreatment that went on back in the day. Things are obviously much, much better now, but back then, you did not want to be a patient there. They packed that building full and just kept building new buildings to hold everyone. At one time, the mentally ill patients outnumbered the staff 500 to 1. There was no way they could care for everyone. In that day and age, you could get admitted to the hospital for just about anything. I mean, if a man wanted to court another woman, he could say his wife was crazy, and they'd put her in there. It was insane. So anyway, the first thing that happened to me was I had just started working there, and it snowed really bad. And I lived about 13 miles away. I could not drive home. It was such a heavy, heavy snow. There was just no way. So they put us all up in different places, and they put me in the old nurses' dorm, which hadn't been used for that in more than half a century. It was a real old building, and I went in there and I laid down, and long about midnight, something woke me up. It felt like something sat on my bed, and I was overcome with just this horrible, terrible, bad feeling. It frightened me so badly. That was my first feeling that something wasn't quite right there. After that, I worked in the geriatrics building. It's a huge open ward with maybe 40, 45 patients, and it was packed full. And all these patients were bedridden. And it was divided, men in one ward, women on the other. A nurse named Betty, she was orienting me, and we started off, began working our way around the room, getting everybody fed. And I remember looking back toward the hallway that connects the two wards. There were a couple of showers and stuff, and there was a cloud of vapor just hanging in the air right there at the doorway. I called Betty's attention to it, and I said, "Look at that." I said, "Is somebody taking a shower?" And we're like, "No, there's nobody taking a shower." Remember, all our patients were bedridden. We stood there and watched it, and it just dissipated. There was no reason that should have been there. And so I said, "What do you think it was?" And Betty said, "I believe you've seen a ghost." And a few nights later, I was in that same big room, and I looked to the back. There was a dark shadow, kind of like squatting is the only thing I can say. It was a black shadow. As I sat there and watched it, this thing stood up and walked right through the wall beside this patient's bed. I have no idea what it was. Was it hurting this patient? I would bet, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that patients saw things that they were not able to express. People would say, he's just seeing things or something like that. But I also know that a lot of my fellow nurses saw things that they refused to admit to just about anyone but me. They had told me several times they'd witnessed things that terrified them so badly, they'd throw their keys down and leave and never come back. They wouldn't even stay the rest of their shift. The truth is, I saw a lot of unusual and frightening things, but I never really felt threatened. It didn't feel like something was trying to hurt me. Besides, I was a single parent. I couldn't afford to quit my job. And after a while, I became the person everyone came to tell their stories to. One of my fellow nurses, Mary, she told me she used to eat her lunch on a bench at the end of one of the big wards, and she said there was a couple of times she'd be sitting there eating her lunch, and she could feel the weight of someone sitting down on the bench with her. I know she was speaking her truth, when she told me that happened to her. Then there was the head of security. He said to me, "Do you really believe in ghosts?" And I said, "I didn't used to, but I do now." And he said, "Well, I've got something to tell you." Now, his office is up there in the center building, and that's where Dr. Murphy had his office. Dr. Murphy was the superintendent here for something like 25 years, starting in 1882, if I remember right. He was one of the good ones, really looked after the patients and saw them as, human beings who needed respect. Anyway, he would sometimes bring his kids to work with him, and they'd run around the offices. They played pranks and ran about, did all they wanted to. And this guy, the head of security, he had his office up there in one of those rooms. He told me that every day when he would go home, he'd leave his pens in a certain way on his desk, and he always had the same channel on the radio station that he listened to. And he said every morning that he would come back into work, his pens would be all disassembled, and the parts would be laying all over his desk, and also his radio station would be changed. It really kind of got him, And I just kind of said, "Well, I'm not surprised." I said that Dr. Murphy's kids were kind of mischievous, and they was probably playing tricks on you. But it wasn't all fun and pranks. There was one nurse who used to work in our division. Her name was Gwen, and she was the best. I loved her. But one day, my supervisor called and said, "Gwen's dead." It was such a shock. And a couple years after that, I was in her old office late at night. I'd never been in there at night before. Nobody in there but me. I'm sitting there signing out my timesheet, and a woman in my right ear says, "Margaret." I think I came as close to having a heart attack or stroke as I ever did in my whole life. It just startled me so badly. I looked around. I didn't see anybody or see anything. Did I hear it in my brain? No, it was definitely somebody calling my name out loud right in my ear like they were right there. The only thing I could think of is that it was Gwen. I trotted right out of there. I've talked to the people who worked there at the time and were eyewitnesses. They said that the handle on his office door would rattle as if someone was trying to get out. Lots of times they would hear that. Oh, and they had a cat that was a resident there, for the patients to pet and what have you. They said lots of times that cat would arch its back like it was being pet, like it was being stroked by something they couldn't see. Also, in that building, they had an elevator that would operate only if you had a special key, and that's the only way it would go up and down. And they would be up on the second floor, and they would hear the elevator start up, and it would come up, the door would open, and there would be nobody in the elevator. Nobody. And there's no way the elevator would work unless it had the key. I still don't know why these spirits chose me to make themselves known to. Maybe because their stories were never told. They might have been forgotten because their family members just left them at the hospital and walked away and never looked back. These people felt abandoned, and maybe they're still roaming because they don't know any other home than this one. I think that, in a way, everything that I was allowed to see was more or less given to me like a gift. Like they want me to see that they were still there. They want to be remembered.
For our final story, we travel with a self-proclaimed witch to a haunted clinic near the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
My name is Pat Bizzardo-Keefe. I'm a writer, photographer, consulting hypnotist who focuses on past life regression. I'm a medium, I'm a psychic, and I'm what they used to call an old granny woman or a granny witch from the Appalachian Mountains. A granny woman is someone who takes care of her community, and that would often be in the area of medicine or herbal healing, natural healing. I traveled the country with two other mediums, Misty and Ashley Connor. They're an incredibly talented duo, and we actually go to locations and we do seances. We allow the spirit to channel us. We allow the spirit to sit in us for a very brief period of time so that, I'm able to speak with those who have crossed over. The Trivet Clinic is located in Hamptonville, North Carolina, at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. So you still have that mountain vibe going on. Doug Gallagher and Tim Trivet are the owners. Tim is actually related to the original Dr. Trivet. When they got the word that the old clinic was going to be raised, they had to buy it. Tim and Doug both just felt compelled that they needed to preserve the history. It's got a really interesting history because it's been used as a clinic, it's been used as a detox center, and it's been used as a rest home. And so you have all this gumbo, if you will, of all of these people using this location for very emotional reasons. In other words, you have all this energy that has been piled into the Trivet Clinic. And there's so much going on there. It's been reported up to 70 ghosts and spirits and entities have been recorded there. Misty, Ashley, and I have done one seance at this location. I was immediately struck by the energy of this place because it's certainly a smaller location than some of the massive places that I have been, the sanatoriums, the asylums, the prisons, and yet you have the same vibration of energy. How a person died can affect whether or not they decide to stay behind. Some of the things that makes an individual decide not to cross over immediately after they pass, a lot of it is connected to unfinished business that we feel in this world. There's all of this emotion because think of it, you're going through detox. I hate to say it, but you have old people being taken there and just abandoned. All of these stories are not as sad, but there are certainly some sad stories. So you have all of that energy, all of that memory, and it is embedded into the energy of the Trivet Clinic. It creates a motor that allows the driving force behind such incredible interactions with ghosts, spirits, and entities at this location. The first person I encountered was Philip. Philip at first scared me because he stands in a corner where I saw him in the basement and he's staring and he's smiling. The smile is plastered on his face and it's like the eyes aren't blinking and the smile isn't going anywhere. He insisted on standing there the entire time, which is usually not something that happens. Many times what I call a sentient ghost will deliver a message and then it will leave. But it was like he was determined to make his presence known. And it felt to me like he felt that he wasn't seen in this lifetime. And so he made quite an impression on me. Jimmy was 6 years old when he passed. And Jimmy is often found whenever you're investigating the location, and he will speak. He wants to talk with you. But the most poignant thing about little Jimmy, who is probably one of my favorite stories, because he will crawl up on your lap. Many people have reported this little energy trying to sit on their lap to get some love and attention, just like he may have done in his lifetime. So he's one of my favorites, but there's so many others. There's another little girl, her name is Majesty, and we think we know how Majesty ended up at the clinic as a permanent resident, and it has to do with its founder, Dr. Trivet. Dr. Trivet's wife wanted a pond in the shape of a heart, which her husband had made for her, and she was so excited about that. It really did establish this visual of their love and their commitment to each other. But the bittersweet part of it is that Majesty may have lost her life there. A visiting psychic tuned into Majesty, and she found that she was not able to breathe. It was like the little girl was gasping for air, trying to get her head above water, and she was experiencing that along with the little girl. So something that was created with such love and attention for Dr. Trivet's love for his wife ended up being a place of death for a very young child, a child who died by drowning. But since then, Majesty has revealed herself to so many different people. They'll put out trigger items for her during an investigation to react to. And so one of the things that they'll put out is a ball. And a grandmother was there. She picked up this ball, and this ball started vibrating between her hands because she asked the little girl to make herself known to her. And the ball started vibrating, like she could barely hold on to it. And finally, the ball just flew out of her hands and bounced across the room. And she was terrified. The grandmother had never had anything like that happen to her before. There was probably something about the grandmother's energy that resonated with little Majesty, so she was actually playing with her. So there's actually some spirits that have come to the Trivet and have decided to stay there. One of them is a man named Eric. Years after he had died, his daughter came to the clinic as part of a paranormal investigation. But she never expected to encounter her own father. His spirit had accompanied her there. And she said, "Oh my gosh, that's my father." Well, she left and she returned the next year, and the same thing happened. And then they started having experiences with Eric there without her there. And so Eric has decided to come and stay there. There was something about the location that resonates with him, that he's comfortable in, and he decided to stay. One of the interesting things, too, about the Trivet Clinic is that some of their staff has never left. There is something about the work that they did that they found such joy in helping others that they decided to stay. There are two nurses in particular. Their names are Dolly and Helen. These two have decided to stay, along with Dr. Trivet, who is also encountered in the building. They are still trying to help people, even today. Now, Misty and Ashley, my medium friends and colleagues who nearly always accompany me to each location, they realized right away that there was a spiritual portal beneath the clinic because there was an energy there that simply didn't make sense. We call them elementals. It's energy that's connected to the land. Native American Indians talked about this kind of energy. So there's definitely a portal in the basement that as soon as they pointed to it, I could feel that humming, and you could feel the connection to earth energy. The reason the Trivet Clinic can compete with larger paranormal venues or locations in terms of activity is it's built right at the end of the foothills of one of the oldest mountain ranges on Earth. The Appalachian Mountains are 500 million years old. They were here and watched the rise of the dinosaurs and their fall. But there's a darkness in these mountains too. We have a lot of superstitions. If you're out in the mountains and you find yourself in the woods, if somebody's whistling, you don't whistle back. In fact, you don't whistle at all, because there's an old saying that if you whistle, it brings the devil. There have been people to go into these mountains and they disappear and they've never been found. And so we're really respectful of the energy in these mountains. But overall, the Trivet Clinic is a fantastic and tried and true place to investigate. Or if you're interested, if you're curious, go there. It has its darkness to it, but it's not so dark that even as someone who is new to investigating cannot enjoy this experience. You may be lucky, like several people have been, to have a child try to sit on your lap and to give you love, even though it's someone who has crossed over. Or you may have the unpleasant experience of seeing Philip staring at you from a corner with a rictus smile placed on his face, one that never moves. Whatever your experience is, know that it connects you to a world that you may have never known or experienced before.
Trivet Clinic allows visits by appointment only, mostly on weekends. They also do special events throughout the year that are open to the public. On our next episode, we explore the witches that have haunted this state for centuries and a modern-day witch who wreaks havoc on one family's life.
And all of a sudden, I see her bow up like something just punched her in the stomach, and she went flying back into the closet. And I ran into her, and she said, "Something just punched me." And she's like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is.
To learn more about the paranormal places and scary stories of North Carolina, visit ncfirstinfright.com. Discover trails and destinations that will haunt you in the best way, and share your own NC scare by tagging hashtag #NCFirstInFright. First in Fright is a production of Visit North Carolina, Luke Wire, and AYR Media. Hosted by me, Cooper Thornton. Executive producers Katie Bailey and Dana Grimstead for Visit North Carolina. Executive producers Nancy Landisberg, Michael Ashley, and Ryan Coleman for Luke Wire. Executive producer Eliza Rosen for AYR Media. Produced and written by Brandon Phibbs. Edited and mixed by Cameron Taggy. Casting producer Danielle Hillenbrand. AYR Media Coordinator Andy Levine. Voices by North Carolina storytellers Alya Yakobovich and Rachel Rose. Special thanks to Margaret Langley and Pat Boussard O'Keefe for sharing their stories.